Hello everybody, I am Tristan Wade for mypokercoaching.com, and today we are going to talk about poker hand rankings and pre-flop poker tips. Now when I'm talking about poker, I'm talking about no limit hold'em, one of the finest forms of poker. But the first thing you need to know is that there are hand rankings that happen in a poker game. And everyone starts with 2 cards, but you take your 2 cards and then you combine your 2 cards with 5 community cards, and then you make your best 5-card hand. So you actually have to know the strength of the hands to really have an understanding of what hand's going to win and if your hand is strong enough to actually wager chips to try to win. So yeah, if you don't know which hands are strong, you can't play poker. So let's get right into it. The first thing you need to know is these are the hands. The strongest hand you can make is a royal flush. You won't see this that often because it's the toughest hand to make, and the reason why it's the toughest hand to make is because it's 5 consecutive cards that are exactly the 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace, all of the same suit. So we call that a royal flush. A royal flush is the strongest possible poker hand that can be made, and it is the highest value of the cards. 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace are the highest value. So when you have those in the highest value, along with the suit, all of the same suit in consecutive order, well, that's the strongest hand you can make. After that, the second strongest hand is a straight flush. And that's like a royal flush, except it's not the best. So if you exclude like the ace from the royal flush and you have 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King of all the same suit, that would be the second best hand you could possibly make, but that's just a straight flush. There's no special name for a straight flush. If you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of all of the same suit, that's also a straight flush. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory, but you need to know how it works. Okay, so after a straight flush, the next strongest hand is 4 of a kind. And that basically is 4 of the same value card. In our example, we have 4 aces with a king kicker. After that, we get into full houses. Now, full house is trips, which is 3 of a kind plus a pair. And that hand is going to be very strong. All these hands I'm mentioning to start are like very strong hands. They're kind of tough to make. You could play for years and not make a royal flush or a straight flush or hit 4 of a kind. But once you get into a full house or weaker, you're going to typically see those hands take place more commonly. Okay, so after a full house, we have a flush. And a flush is just 5 cards of the same suit. So you have, in our example, the King, 10, 8, 7, 5 of clubs. So 5 just any cards of any suit, and then you gauge how strong your flush is given what cards are in your flush. So if I have the ace high flush and someone has the king high flush, I'm going to win because my ace is higher than their king in the flush category. So highest value flush is going to win. After a flush, the next strongest hand is a straight. And a straight is just 5 consecutive cards in a row. The caveat here is an ace can be high or low. So you can make a straight with an ace with ace 2, 3, 4, 5. You can also make a straight with an ace through 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace, which would be the strongest straight. We call that Broadway. In our example, we have the straight from the 6 to the 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So those are all pretty strong hands. Now we're going to get into the weaker tier hands, but they're still relevant, they still matter, and they're pretty strong hands depending on the situation still. Okay. After that, we have 3 of a kind. 3 of a kind is just 3 of the same card. Now, that might happen when you have 1 card in your hand and 2 of those other value cards come on the board. You can make 3 of a kind using 1 of the cards in your hand and 2 on the board. Another deceptive way to make 3 of a kind is when you start with a pair. If you start with a pair of 5s, let's say, and then a 5 comes on the board, well, wow, you've just made a deceptive 3 of a kind, and that's going to be a very strong holding typically. When you think about three of a kind and these other lesser value card strengths, they don't use all 5 cards. Look at that, right? Three of a kind is ace, 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 king, queen. If our opponent had ace, 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 jack 10, they would lose to the ace, ace, king, queen. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. After three of a kind, we have 2 pair, which is kind of self-explanatory, but it's 2 pair. You have cards that match up twice to make 2 pairs. Now, you can have a pair in your hand and a pair on the board, or you can make 2 pair either or, using your cards and the board, or just, your 2 cards with 2 cards on the board. And then after that, we have 1 pair. Let's just say you have a pair of aces. I have nothing else. And then we have a high card. Who just has the highest 5 cards? Now remember, this is a 5-card game. So you have to use the 2 in your hand and the 5 on the board to make your best 5-card hand. So very important to understand the hand rankings, and then you can kind of understand how you should play once you understand where in the realm of strength you are in terms of strongest possible hands. All right, so as I was alluding to, this is a really fundamental part of Texas Hold'em, and it's the kickers. When both players have the same hand that does not consist of 5 cards, so right, a straight is, you have to use your 5 cards typically to make a straight. You have to use 5 cards to make a flush, right? Well, if we're not using all 5 cards to make a strong hand, well, then the next highest card wins. So what I mean by that is, for example, if both players have a pair of kings, well, the player with the king, king, jack, 6, 4 is going to beat the player with the king, king, 8, 4, 3, because a jack is a higher value than an 8. So after both players have the same holding, if they're not using all 5 cards, then we find a kicker, and the highest value kicker is going to win the pot. In the next example, we have 2 pair, 4s and 3s, with an ace kicker is going to beat 4s and 3s with a king kicker. An ace is higher than a king. So it's really important to understand that, because yeah, it's nice to make a really strong hand in poker, but when you're not using all 5 cards, you gotta be weary of the other value card you're using. Are you using a card from the community, or are you using a card in your hand? And then how high is that value? So it's really important to understand that. A tie occurs when both players have the same 5 cards. Pretty self-explanatory. And there are some times when you will see a tie come in because the kicker is going to be the same, and we basically are using the same 5 cards. So that's how that works. And then the pot is split evenly if 2 players have the same hand. Let's say we both have the straight, or we both have 2 pair with an ace kicker, then we would just split the pot. And, this stuff doesn't matter as much in those instances, but it's still good to know because it does play a crucial role in the game of poker. All right, the next thing to cover is the hand ranking rules. These are just kind of dissecting a little of the hand strengths that we covered. When both players have a full house, the one with the highest 3 of a kind wins. So let's say I have aces full of 3s. I have ace, 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 3, 3. That's going to beat 3s full of kings, which would be 3, 3, 3, king, king. So you always want to think about the 3 of a kind. How high is that 3 of a kind? Because that's technically how you define your full house. So if I have ace, 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 3, 3, it's aces full of 3s. It's your 3 of a kind full of whatever the pair is. And that's really important concept to understand. When both players have a flush, the highest flush wins. Again, if I'm playing jack 10 of clubs and my opponent plays ace 5 of clubs, and the board comes 3 clubs that don't make me a straight flush, then I'm going to lose with a jack high flush to the ace high flush. It doesn't matter that my opponent has an ace and a 5 and I have a jack and a 10. The higher value card is going to win in that instance. When both players have a straight, the highest one wins. Again, so be careful. If the board comes 4, 5, 6, 7 and an 8 makes a straight, well, 8, 9 actually makes what we call the nuts, which is the best hand. So you have to be concerned about that sometimes. So yeah, the highest straight is always going to win, and that is possible to happen. When both players have 2 pair, the highest pair wins. So kings and queens is going to lose to aces and 2s. Whenever the higher pair is going to trump the middling pairs in those instances. And then, kind of what we already explained, when both players have no pair, the highest hand wins. So ace, king, queen, jack 3 is basically going to beat any other high hand unless someone's got ace, king, queen, jack 9, right? So always think about just the highest card values here when you're thinking about hand ranking rules. And now let's talk about the best pre-flop starting hands. These are the best hands to start with. You start with 2 cards in this game. Obviously, 2 aces is the best hand to start with. Why? Because those are the highest value cards in the deck. Aces is stronger than kings. It's stronger than queens. It's stronger than jacks. But here we go down the list. So we start with aces, right? Makes sense. Next, we have pocket kings. Second strongest hand, of course. The third strongest hand is pocket queens. Okay, now that's good because we're just going down the line of value hands for value pairs. The fourth highest hand is pocket jacks. Now this is where things get a little more interesting. Ace king suited becomes the 5th highest ranking hand. And sometimes you could switch 4 and 5, jacks and ace king suited here, because ace king suited is going to be fairly strong because it has an ace and a king. And if it's not up against aces or kings, pocket aces or pocket kings, then that means we can hit an ace or a king on the board or make a flush or a straight with a hand like ace king suited, and that's also going to be a very powerful hand. So that's why that's 5th in the hand rankings. And then as you can see the natural progression of kind of where we're going here, the 6th strongest hand is pocket 10s, the 7th strongest hand is ace king offsuit. Again, we could clump ace king into different categories here because it's very strong in relation to like how it plays against some of these pairs like 10s and jacks, but so be it. Ace queen suited is hand number 8, pocket 9s is hand number 9, and then we have ace jack suited coming in at number 10. And then as you can see in the bottom left here, we got the next strongest hands. We got some suited Broadways, king queen suited, king jack suited, queen jack suited. As you can tell, the trend here is the higher the value, the stronger the hand. So aces is really strong. Ace king is really strong. Ace queen is still strong, but it's lowering. So then it kind of makes sense that like king queen suited, king jack suited, queen jack suited are all strong hands. And then other pocket pairs are strong hands like 6s and 7s and 8s. And then the last strongest hands are offsuit Broadways, king queen, king jack, queen jack. And I would probably throw one more hand class in here, suited aces. Because if you compare suited aces to suited Broadways or offsuit Broadways, those hands are going to play pretty well typically because you'll almost always have an overcard with your ace, and then with its suitability, you can have some flush possibilities where you're going to make the nut flush or the ace high flush, and then you also have some other possibilities maybe to make a straight, whether you have like wheel cards like ace 2 or ace 3 suited or ace 4 suited or ace 5 suited, or if you have like a hand like ace 10 suited, then that becomes pretty valuable too. Cool. Well, let's look at pre-flop winning percentages, right? So I've talked to you about all these hands you can start with. Well, how do I know what's good, right? Like you're telling me pocket aces is good, but what does that mean? Well, this is what we mean. Poker is a game of percentages. It's a game of math. It's a game of variance. So there is luck involved, but it's a calculated risk. So these percentages I'm about to go over are going to explain a little bit about that. So aces, pocket aces is going to beat a random hand. If your opponent just has a random hand, pocket aces is going to hold up 85% of the time. Aces is going to beat a lower pair 80% of the time. So if we get all in and I have pocket aces and you have pocket 2s, well, those pocket 2s are going to beat me almost 20% of the time. And that's not going to change if I have aces and you have kings. It's still going to be 20% of the time. Aces versus queens is still going to lose 20% of the time. So aces against any lower pair, or if you want to exclude aces and you just want to say a high pair against a lower pair, that high pair is going to win about 80% of the time. But again, it's going to lose 20% of the time too. So you have to be cautious, and you have to understand that even though you might be an 80% favorite, that 20% is going to happen occasionally as well. An overpair beats a low suited connector 80% of the time. So if I have pocket queens and someone has 5-6 suited, those queens are going to hold up majority of the time. A pair beats an overcard and an undercard 70% of the time. So a hand like pocket tens is going to beat ace 3 suited 70% of the time. You know, a high card and a low card. So if someone has one card over your pair, they're going to only be able to beat you about 30% of the time. 2 overcards beat 2 undercards 62% of the time. So now we just have like 2 high cards against 2 lower cards. So those high cards, since those high cards hold value, that forces the undercards to have to hit a pair or hit a straight or hit a flush to win. So if they don't connect, they're just going to lose by default. And that's why undercards lose 38% of the time there. Or actually, sorry, they lose 62% of the time. I was doing the math backwards. And then a high card and a low card are going to beat 2 middle cards 60% of the time. A pair is going to beat 2 overcards 55% of the time. So if I have a pair of 5s to start with, and my opponent has king queen or jack 10 or ace 10, any 2 higher cards, it's going to be about a 50-50 coin flip, we like to call it, on who's going to win. And then one caveat here again is being suited makes your hand win 3% more often. If you're suited, it adds that extra incentive to maybe make a flush, which is going to happen and increase your chances to win. And then when you make a flush, that's a pretty strong hand, as we saw in the earlier slide. So that is pretty advantageous to play suited hands that have high value when you can. So yeah, I hope this little breakdown on hand rankings and some pre-flop tips was helpful. And I'm Tristan Wade from mypokercoaching.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.